In this chapter, I'd like to push a little bit more into JavaScript and how it works. And again, my goal is not to make you all into programmers, but to show you just how JavaScript does what it does, and in the hopes that a little familiarity with JavaScript structures will help you be able to work with whatever scripts you choose, and still be able to troubleshoot or even modify them to match your content. Now, the first thing I want to take a look at is how JavaScript interacts with other HTML elements. So let's open up our first file called try.html_elements. And I'll open it in the browser first so we can see that it's just a basic page with a title and a couple of paragraphs. And let's go ahead and open it up in our text processing program so that we can start to edit it. Now, in our last chapter, we had a little bit of a look at how JavaScript could write out to the page using the write function. But this time, I want to start by actually reading something from the page. So let's try out a new function. The function we're looking for is getElementById. Now, there's a number of ways to do this in JavaScript, but one of the most popular, and the one that you'll probably see most often, is getElementById function. So let's try that out. As its name implies, you're going to access elements inside the HTML from their ID name. So what we need to do first is give something in our page an ID value that we can go and read from. So I'm going to do it for the h1 tag up here at the top. Now, you've probably used IDs before for CSS. And this might be the first time you're setting one up so that JavaScript can access it. I'll just start with the ID attribute. We'll use the equal sign, and we'll set our name up in quotes. And since this is a page title, I'll just call it title. You can use whatever name you want. And now at least one thing on our page has an ID, we can try out the JavaScript. I've already got a couple of script tags down here right below the close body tag, so we'll go ahead and add some statements here. And this gives us a nice practical use for our variables as well, because the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable to store what's in the title. Now I'll just call it page title. And I've used an uppercase T in the name just to make it a little bit easier to read, but still conform to our no spaces rule. I'll use an equal sign, and we're going to try out our new function. Now, just like the write function, this one starts out with document, because that's where we're pulling the information from. We'll use a dot in between, and then we'll call the function name, which in this case is getElementById. Now, I said it nice and slow like that because you can see that we have capital letters once again for each one of the major words, just making the function easier to read. Now remember, this one, we didn't make up the function name ourselves, so we have to actually type it this way in order to get the function to work. Of course, we've got parentheses because it's a function. Now, back inside the parentheses, that's where we want to put the ID of the item we want to get. And in this case, that'll be title. So let's just add that in there in quotes. And now we're almost there, because what this statement does so far, document.getElementById title, is it gets us this element from our HTML page. But it's not quite what we want, because the element also includes the tags with the text inside of it. So we're going to add one more thing on here, and once again, we're going to use this dot syntax to join them together. I'm going to add on to the end of this statement the property inner HTML. Now, that instructs JavaScript to find this element, then go inside the element and extract the text only. So now we've completed our final statement. Of course, I want to put a semicolon at the end of that, and now we should have the variable page title loaded up with whatever is inside the element title. Not too bad so far, but we won't be able to see anything. So let's try to write out that title to the page so that we can make sure that it matches. I'll just go to the line below, and I'll use our document write function that we used before. And what I'm going to write is the page title variable. Now remember, we don't need to put that in quotes because we want the value of page title and not the word page title printed to the page. Again, I'll put a semicolon at the end of my line. And let's go try it out. I'm going to save my changes to the page, and we'll go back out to the browser, and we'll hit a refresh. Now you can see that it's pasted down here at the bottom, interacting with HTML elements, and that's exactly what the text was inside the title. Now you may have noticed one thing about the page that I'm testing it on, and that is I had a paragraph up here saying the title of this page is, and then it stops. And then I have this placeholder paragraph in between with lorem ipsum. And finally, we have what we wrote from our JavaScript statements. But that's down here at the bottom. And in our last chapter, when we were talking about the write statement, I mentioned that the text will be placed wherever the script is placed. And since the script is at the bottom of the page, that's where it's going, at the bottom. Now let's go back and take a look at our document. If I wanted the title written right at the end of that paragraph, I'd actually have to write my script right here where I'd want the text placed, which would be inside the paragraph, and it might be a little bit messy. Well, it turns out we don't need to do that because we've got another way to write to our document, and this way is going to give us a lot more control over the placement. It turns out also that it's going to be the same function. We can use document.getElementById to either read from the page or actually write to the page. Now, let me show you how that'll work. The first thing we need to do is place an HTML element with an ID at the location where we want our text to appear. And that would be right here inside of our paragraph tags. To mark the location best, I'll just use a span tag. So we'll add span, and I'll set the ID to insert location. I'll close off the span tag with just a normal close, and we won't put anything in it right now because we're going to have our JavaScript supply that for us. Now that we've got a marked location, we can have our getElementById function find it. So let me just remove the document write statement that we have down here, and we'll replace it with a document.getElementById function call. Inside the parentheses, I'll place the name insert location. So our function will find our new spot, and once again, I'm trying to change the contents inside the tag, so that would be .innerHTML. Now this time, I'm trying to change the contents. So now that I've found that location, I use an equal sign. Now notice from our last statement, we were assigning the value of our variable page title. Whatever's on the left side of the equation is what we're doing the assigning to. This time, our assignment is being done to the inner HTML of our insert location ID. And using the equal sign, we'll just assign that to the variable page title. And I'll end that with a semicolon. Now, let's save our document, and let's go out and try it again. When I refresh the page this time, you can see that our new text has been inserted right where we wanted it to, even though our script is down at the end of the document. And this is probably the way most developers are going to work with JavaScript. The getElementById function is really powerful, in fact, more powerful than you think. Let me go back to our document, and so far we're only using the inner HTML property. This function allows us to go find an element on the HTML page, and we can use a lot of different properties to do things to that element. Let me just give you an example. I'm going to go down a line below our last line of script, and once again, I'm going to use document.getElementById and choose the insert location. Now this time I don't want to change the HTML, I want to change the style. So I'm going to use dot, and I'll type in the style property. This gives me direct access to all the CSS styles that are applied to this particular element. And just like the inner HTML, I can read off the style to find out what it is, or use the function to change the style. I'll do a quick change to the font weight. So at the end of style, I'll just keep going with the dot syntax. I'll type dot again, and now that I'm in style, I can pick which style I want to change. We'll type font weight. Now, one thing to notice when working with JavaScript, we use the capital letters and no spaces instead of the dash when referring to style properties. So normally in CSS, this would be font dash weight. You simply remove the dash and use a capital W in order to access the same property in JavaScript. I'll just set the value to a known value for the font weight, which is bold. We'll put that in quotes because that's not a variable, that's a value. And I'll end my line with a semicolon. Once again, we'll just save our changes, and I'll just go ahead and refresh the page. And now you can see that our JavaScript has, just like last time, extracted the text out of the title and placed it at the end of this paragraph, but also it has applied our bold style to it. So you can clearly see now that getElementById is going to be one of the more powerful ways we can work with our HTML page itself.